Let's move on to our panel discussion. Panel members also from different background, from the solution provider, consulting, forensics, incident response, legal advice. We have all in this panel. Let's start with Dana first. So Dana, can you give us a quick introduction about yourself?
Sure. So Dana Mitchell, I'm the General Manager of Security for Microsoft Canada. Joined the company the very first day that Microsoft shut the office down for COVID. Prior to this, I was the President of Micro Focus Canada and spent 11 years at IBM as well.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much. All right, let's move on to Josh.
Hi everyone, Josh Iroko here, Senior Consultant out of the Toronto office for FireEye Mandiant. Been with FireEye for a little bit under 3 years now, and was with PricewaterhouseCoopers before that. My COVID-themed contribution is I'm trying to reduce the amount of times I join calls and I'm on mute or join the wrong link or what have you. Looking forward to a great chat.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Josh. And Stas.
Hi, everyone. As Bryan mentioned, my name is Stas. I'm a lawyer at Strigberger, Bryan, Armstrong, which is a mouthful, so let's just call it SBA. My work predominantly revolves around defending organizations or individuals in lawsuits, whether it be with respect to negligence or privacy or cyber incidents. Another big portion of my work is surrounding assisting organizations with preparing for cyber breaches or cyber attacks, creating response plans, assisting them as a breach coach in the course of a cyber privacy event, and then, of course, defending them if there's a lawsuit that comes up in the future as a result.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. So for people online, I'd also encourage you to submit your questions. I have my standard question, and hopefully I can also pick up some of your questions to ask our panel. All right. My first question, because why ransomware is so become a very kind of a hot topic right now, really because there are many ransomware attacks. I guess that part also increased a lot after the COVID-19 pandemic started. So my first question to you is, from your experience or your previous engagement, what types of organizations and industries are typically kind of a target for ransomware?
Bryan, I'm happy to kick this one off. So if I look at the types of threat or organizations that threat actors are going for, there's really a number of categories. The first is industries. And research really has shown that there's really 4 types of industries that they're going after predominantly. It doesn't mean that everybody could be affected, but the real focus has been around healthcare, government, education, small business, and manufacturing, and that includes all the organizations across their supply chains. And the types of organizations that they're going after are ones that have smaller security teams, lower budgets, industries with sensitive data like law firms, organizations who can afford to pay more, and those who don't have 24/7 monitoring and staff. They're looking for types of organizations that have out-of-date software, and they're considering organizations that have attractive and important information, and those within industries where they need quick access back to their data and they can demand ransom quickly. They're really looking at how vulnerable the security solutions are and how easily it is to penetrate an organization.
All right, thank you very much for sharing this insight. For hackers, it's a bit to look at the vulnerabilities. And all right, so Josh, from your practice, so what do you see? Who will be the easy target?
Yeah, for sure. Easy is a different way to look at it, right? Because part of it is a business. Ransomware as a service has actually taken a lot of steam over the last year or so. Essentially, this is a subscription, right? You subscribe and you try to use either someone's already developed ransomware software to execute your own attacks, or you actually outsource the entire model if you've already gained access and you're looking for someone with more expertise. So it spreads out a wide range in terms of industry base. I mean, we've responded to basically almost every kind of industry you can think of, and even smaller and medium-sized organizations are getting affected, as well. One thing to note is last year, the Maze ransomware group did shut down, but prior to that, they popularized the name and shame model. Essentially, why we threaten you, and then we add to say we're going to put it on this website, and no one wants their stuff on that website, because then it just reduces different kind of capabilities for you from a business standpoint. So it's affecting a lot of industries. Obviously, it's a business model, and they're sort of driving that way, and they're ensuring that they're innovating as well. Different variants are being used when they're deploying against different networks.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. And Stas, a lot of incident response, the breach coach. So are there many ransomware with those breaches?
We're seeing a lot of, so firstly, there's been a bit of a development in the ransomware, in the way that ransomware is actually deployed. If, let's say, a year and a half ago, the whole point is to just shut down a business and prevent them from making money, for instance, a law firm getting shut down, obviously, organizations have developed and have created more backups and have put backups onto a different service from the main function of the organization and responded properly. Now, ransomware, as we saw a few months ago, our firm responded to a business operating in the legal field. They were hit with a ransomware attack, but the bigger issue is that not only did they shut down the entire network, they also exfiltrated data and threatened to publish that data on the dark web and release all the private information, which was obviously extremely sensitive. So the payment of the ransom was in part to not just get back up and running, which can be done now with restoring from other backups, but also to try and secure the information that was actually exfiltrated. So that's a big development that we've been seeing in the last 12 to 18 months, give or take. But to expand just more broadly onto the question of who's targeted, I would have to echo Dana's comments a few moments earlier that, of course, it's the legal industry, the financial, the medical industries are the ones that are being targeted heavily. You're seeing infrastructure being hit. But you're also seeing attacks on organizations that you wouldn't necessarily assume would be attacked. For instance, 2 days ago, CD Projekt Red, which is the creator of Cyberpunk game for PlayStation and Xbox, they were hit with a ransomware. So you're seeing attacks coming from all over. It's just a question of whether or not they're going to get paid to allow the organization to get back up and running.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Stas. Actually, for some questions our audience, attendees submitted, what are some major motivations behind the ransomware, and what kind of current attack trend, right? So you actually covered that part. Bryan, do you have anything to add on to this?
One thing Stas said was quite interesting about some of the different types of demands that criminal organizations are making, and one of the most insidious ones I heard was the criminal organization, and being in a network, they made some changes to the integrity of the data. So they've modified the integrity of customer data, financial data, and they were basically saying, we'll restore your original data. We're not going to tell you exactly what we did, and unless you pay the ransom. And that's a really difficult demand to overcome because backups won't help. There's not a lot of things you can do to that. So for those of you that are security nerds, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, integrity doesn't usually come up, but if someone messes with your data integrity, that's a pretty compelling threat.
That's a great insight, because previously we thought, okay, hackers just lock your data pretty much, so you cannot access. But you mentioned also integrity part, so they can also modify the data. So that's something you really need to be careful about. And all right, so that's the first question. And another hot question usually people ask is, because ransomware, why we call ransom, that's related to money. It's a kind of a malicious software, but you need to pay money to get your data back. So should we pay or not pay? Pay or not pay? This is a question we often hear from our audience. So what's your insight? And in case you don't pay, and how can you get? So on one side, if you pay, can you really get your data back? On the other side, if you don't pay, what does that mean? So with that question, maybe we start from Josh first, because you had a lot of incident response.
Yeah, for sure. We typically suggest clients to talk to their breach coaches. So Stas is probably a lot more in these. But from our standpoint, in terms of the payment piece, we're dealing with containing the incident, triaging it initially, containing it, and then remediating the environment to ensure that we can recover. What I've seen actually is there's this ransomware, different groups who actually provide you with the reasons, the tidbits on how they got in. So if you paid, for example, they'd actually tell you what to go patch. They'll tell you parts of the network that are not segmented properly. You think it's ridiculous, but it is actually part of the business model for some of these attackers. They take this very, very professionally. A lot of attackers, sometimes we've seen with organizations, they will pay and not get it back. And some organizations do get it back. So it's a tricky situation that usually ends up with legal.
Mm-hmm. I know that this is also very much related to legal advice. Okay, so Stas, what do you say on that one?
So that's a very, very hotly debated topic of whether or not you should pay the ransom. And I want to firstly preface my comments on this. The police and the police ultimately and law enforcement, their position is you do not pay ransom. And that's not just with respect to ransomware. It's just generally for any type of ransom situation, you don't pay ransom because there are many different reasons, but one of the main ones is that it perpetuates the vicious cycle of enforcing that you can actually get paid as a result of this type of criminal enterprise. In fact, a week ago, the New York's Department of Financial Services actually put out a statement specifically regarding ransomware, saying don't pay ransom, and exactly what I just said, because it perpetuates the vicious cycle. But at the end of the day, the decision has to be made by the organization. If you cannot function, if your organization does not have the backups that it needed, and if all of your data is about to get destroyed by this malicious actor, you may have to pay the ransom to take a risk. And I know that I believe Dana or Bryan have some statistics on whether or not you actually get your data back if you pay the ransom, which I'll let them speak to in a moment. But you may have to take that risk to actually pay the ransom if you can get back up online and make a decision that way. Another main consideration that you have to have is a lot of organizations are subject to privacy legislation. And in Ontario, you have, for instance, PIPEDA, which is a federal level legislation that requires an organization to assess whether or not there's a real risk of significant harm to your users, and whether or not you have to report the incident to the privacy commissioner. That, again, kind of factors into your decision of whether or not you're going to pay the ransom, because if data has been exfiltrated from your networks, and there's personal health information in that data, if that information subsequently gets leaked onto the dark web, you may have to report the organization to the privacy commissioners. You may have to notify your users, which is going to inevitably turn into lawsuits, fines, so on and so forth. So and if the perpetrator is providing you with some kind of assurance that they're not going to expose your information, perhaps it might be worth to actually pay off the ransom to try and secure some kind of assurance that it won't be published. But I'll pass it over to Dana or Bryan to speak on the statistics of whether or not paying it will actually help.
Yeah, and that's great. Thank you. So I spoke to a board of a customer recently, and they had the same question. And I was lucky enough to find a survey that was completed on about 1,200 ransomware attacks over the last 18 months. And some of the stats that came out were interesting. So the first one is 28% of organizations paid and they got their data back. 17% paid, they didn't get their data. 44% didn't pay and they were able to recover their data. And finally, 11% didn't pay and they lost their data. So it really is all over the map. And I think it has to do with how well an organization is prepared for a ransom attack, and what industries they're in and how affected they are by losing their data.
Excellent. That's a great insight. Anything to add to that?
No, we're not typically involved at that phase of the decision-making process, so I'm always interested to hear what Stas and Dana and Josh have to say.
Okay. All right. Let's move on. All right. So pay or not pay, and I know some company actually prepare for this. So there's a question of what kind of method for the payment. Usually, it's a Bitcoin, I guess, the digital cryptocurrency.
Yeah, it's usually Bitcoin, and they're usually requesting about 1 Bitcoin for every server that the organization has data, which if you're a larger organization with larger volumes of information, that may turn to be quite expensive. But we are seeing they are usually business people, these hackers, so they would usually engage in some kind of negotiation. So it is possible to talk it down, but definitely Bitcoin is the way to go for them.
Yeah. And one interesting story I heard is some company kind of want to do the preparation. So they've actually pre-bought some like Bitcoin just in case those kind of things happen. And they actually made some money recently because of those crazy like, price increase.
Yeah.
All right.
So I was going to add, Bryan,
sorry, Dana?
Yeah, what I was going to add is we've actually seen a case in recent weeks where they were looking for money transfer with wire transfer. So they are thinking outside the box, and Stas, as you said, they are really business professionals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. All right. Of course, nobody wants to get a breached, right? So nobody wants to get the ransomware. So from protection point of view, what kind of things we can do, and what kind of things an organization can proactively implement technology or technical controls or admin controls or IAM. So what kind of things you can do? So for this one, maybe it's Dana, you start first.
Sure, happy to. So I talk to CIOs and CISOs all the time about this topic because there's business controls and there's technology. The first real topic we talked through, and there's a number of them that I'll just share today. We've talked about backups a little bit today. And the real point on backups is having multiple backups, both online and offline. We know if they're all online, a threat actor can get to everything that's online, should they have the right capabilities with your organization. So having offline backups as well, and not only just having the backup, but testing those backups and making sure that you can restore, because that'll be part of the way you approach a ransom attack. The second is to utilize technologies that identify and contain phishing emails. We all know this is the #1 attack vector, and protecting your organization from that is super important. Bryan talked to multi-factor authentication under a zero trust model, specifically with minimum privilege for users and executives. I mentioned keeping current patches current earlier. We know this is very critical to an organization and really just to the operations of an organization. Implementing a layered security approach, including encryption. I noticed there was a question in the chat about encryption. That is really key because it really goes back to the point of if your data is altered, that's a potential threat vector for ransom attacks. So encrypting your data is very key. One of the other points I speak frequently to is for customers to look out of the box for abnormal behavior. And organizations typically do that with a SIM or a UEB solution, but really make sure that the capabilities utilize automation with artificial intelligence and machine learning that gets you to much more levels of data. We talked about IR response a little bit. We always recommend to customers to do a proactive assessment with a team like Mandiant, so you know where the weaknesses are within your security landscape. And finally is just to complete cybersecurity training with all employees. When I joined Microsoft, even as coming in as a GM of security, the very first course that I took was on cybersecurity training, and we posted a link in the chat here to some resources. So I think overall, just investing in an integrated security solution that leverages automation and security intelligence, plus these other points that I brought through, will better prepare you for such an attack.
Excellent. And Dana, you actually mentioned quite a lot of controls, very important. What I hear, some really important are like backup, like awareness training, and the layers of defense. And also, if you can implement some like a threat intelligence, and the security monitoring, so asset management. So those are, and a patch management, right? So those are, so it's not just for ransomware, it's a hygiene for all the cybersecurity, right? So, all right. And Josh, do you have anything to add on to this, the protection side?
Yeah, for sure. From a services standpoint, you can perform technical tabletop exercises within your IT security team, essentially practicing in the case that this happens in real life. How would you leverage the tools that Dana was talking about, right? Or actually your playbooks, if you do have these. These would really help you because simulation tends to bring out some recommendations on what you're supposed to do in the case of creating a more verbose plan, implementing better controls and so on and so forth. We found that even performing ransomware defense assessments, so essentially what they would be is simulating on a strategic layer, simulating with your executives, but actually performing technical control validation. So essentially, there's many solutions out there. We have something called Mandiant security validation, which tests your network and aspects of your network based on your scope to see if they would react. And so these are sort of mapped to techniques and procedures used by attackers. A lot of them map to the MITRE attack framework. And from a technical standpoint, we've seen that a lot of folks actually use this a lot because what they want is just not talking about it, but can our current technical controls actually perform against an eventual attacker? And these attackers are different kinds, right? So to the question that Dana was trying to reference there, they may not essentially go after data, they may go after availability. We talk about confidential integrity, availability, and they may encrypt the network. So attack groups like Dopopema or Revel, that was a lot of their own, or it still is a lot of their playbook, right? So there's a lot of nuance to this. As you mentioned, this is ensuring hygiene, but constant validation of controls is key.
Excellent. You also talk about preparation for, we usually call it a playbook, right? So what kind of things, some exercise you need to do, and a tabletop exercise as well. Bryan, so of course, you mentioned the IMPM, but from protection point of view, what kind of suggestion you can add to this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad we moved on to more of a general discussion because, I see everything through the lens of identity, but of course, you need multiple layers. These threats can be quite sophisticated, and fortunately, everything that Dana and Josh mentioned are things you should probably be doing anyway. So this isn't just more things on your plate due to ransomware. These are really fundamental things to the organization, backups, that type of thing. And just to zoom in on what somebody said about backups as well, testing your backups. Every organization does backups or say they do backups. Restoring from backups periodically is critical, and not just the technical aspects of restoring from backups. What is that process? And by that, I mean, you could ask a technical person how quickly you could restore from backup, and that person might say, I can do a server in 2 hours. Okay, that's our ransomware plan. Of course, a lot has to happen before you can flip the switch and do that in a real live scenario. You need approvals. You're going to be potentially destroying data or restoring over top of data. So these are things that might turn a 2-hour restore into a 12 or 14-hour restore. So be realistic about backups in particular, because that really is a fundamental thing.
Excellent. So backup is really, really important. And I'm curious with that one, yes, traditionally we have on-premises. So any backup, you're probably saving your whatever disk or like a tape or things. Now we have a cloud. Right, so there's also a question from the audience mentioned that, okay, does that make any difference when we have a cloud coming that will change the way we protect from a ransomware? So with that kind of question, anyone can jump in just to share your thoughts about how cloud plays some roles with ransomware protection.
Yeah, I can start, and obviously folks would flesh this out a bit more. You have to consider your on-prem and cloud environments as a singular entity with the way the world is going now. And, Brian's talked a lot about access. In the case where, for example, you spin up this cloud environments, but did not perform a configuration assessment from a security standpoint, or the way that your developers connect to the cloud does not go through your actual network. So maybe they don't connect via VPN, MFA, and then jump from there into the cloud environment. If they were connecting, the other way around, what you are doing is exposing the organization to risk. A lot of it is from an access standpoint for sure, and a lot of it is from a hygiene standpoint. I mean, a lot of organizations still have legacy authentication configuration turned on their cloud environment, but they don't know about it because they never performed an assessment.
Excellent. And of course, Microsoft is one of the leading cloud providers. So Dana, what do you say about that one?
Well, if you're looking at in the cloud or on-premise, every large enterprise has data everywhere, right? 85% of organizations have a multi-cloud organization. And it's making sure that you have the right security controls and tools in place to continue to advance your security score against each of those. You want to make sure that you have encryption on in the right places, that you're doing the right necessary things with firewalls and DDoS protection and anything else that might hit your cloud environments, and ensuring that you've got it replicated across all of them. And then give yourself the visibility to that, plus your on-prem security platforms with a SIEM solution.
Excellent. All right. Cloud right now is very hot, the acceleration of digital transformation and the cloud adoption. So a lot of practice you previously have done on premise, now you really need to look into the cloud to see how that works. All right. So we talk about protection. There are a lot of topics for sure. And at the end of the day, really also relate to your cybersecurity hygiene. So, but always there are two sides of story for cybersecurity. One is on protection side, another is on the respond and the recover side, right? Because as we all know, there's no 100% security, right? So what if that happened, right? So, and people also submit some questions. So what if we already got the ransomware attack? Or how should we respond? Who should I talk to? And what should we do? So with that one, and I will start with Stas because he is on the breach coach. So what do you say? What kind of things we need to do first?
So I would like to just say that everything that Bryan, Dana, and Josh have said so far is absolutely critical to ensuring to try and lessen, first of all, the frequency of the attacks and to the severity of them when they do happen. If they do happen, one of the biggest things that we would recommend is for organizations to be ready to respond, to know who you're going to call, to know what the escalation points are. At what point are you going to have to, is it one of your employees going to have to bring it up the ladder? At what point will you actually have to get legal involved? When do you have to get the forensic team involved? All of that needs to be determined before any attacks happen. So one of the simplest, cheapest ways to go about to take a first step is to first of all just determine who is going to be the head point at the organization. Most small to medium-sized businesses can't dedicate one specific individual to be the CISO. So it has to be a hat that's shared between maybe one or two people who have to make those decisions. But that has to be determined ahead of time. Usually your first call would be to a breach coach who would get in touch with your preferred vendors, whether it be a forensic IT company, or if it's a more public type of issue, maybe it's time to get PR involved, or when do you have to report this issue to the privacy commissioner? When do you notify the individuals who are affected? All of these decisions need to be made, and they have to be made quickly. So ultimately, to set up a playbook ahead of time and be ready with your contact information, who you're calling, and when you're doing that. The other thing that is critical is getting cyber insurance. Cyber insurance has been around for a little while now, but you're seeing it increase in popularity, and insurance companies are starting to tighten up their language of their coverage because you're seeing a lot of, it's called silent cyber, you're seeing a lot of coverage coming up for unintended issues. So you'll have, for instance, the directors and officers policy responding to a cyber issue, which it was never meant to, but that's beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But the point is, your organization needs to invest in cyber insurance. Typically, a response will cost anywhere between $100,000 to $250,000. So you want to have somebody paying that bill rather than just you yourself. So in addition to just the actual ransom that you have to pay the breach coach, which in the grand scheme isn't that much compared to the forensic work that you're going to have to do to get you back up and running, making sure that there's no further viruses in your system, that it won't pop up in 10 months when you think your servers are clear. You have to be willing to put that money up, and insurance will actually cover that cost. So not a bill that you want to be left with at the end of the day.
Excellent. That's really great advice. And related to that, there's a question actually from the audience. Can we negotiate the price? So if hackers ask like a 20K, 40K, can we put it down to 20K? So someone can act as a negotiator?
Yeah, for sure. And we're seeing that quite frequently. As I said before, and Dana confirmed, these people aren't just sole hackers sitting in a basement trying to figure out what they're doing. They're actual enterprises who, for them, it's a legitimate business. So they will negotiate a price, especially if the organization does have backups, but maybe they exfiltrated private data. How much is that worth to you? So they will engage in the conversation.
All right, good to know. All right, Josh, from you. So you have done a lot of incident response, the forensic side. So what do you say for the respond and the recovering part of the ransomware attack?
Yeah, I'll take it two parts. On the strategic part, you should have an incident response retainer. With Mandiant, with a third party that's capable of this, you should have one. It just helps because then you can sort of call them at need. These are defined service level agreements, 2 hours, 4 hours, what have you, based on your availability requirements. So that takes care of it strategically. And what organizations are actually doing now is you can roll that over so you can keep having those hours and they don't go to waste. On the technical standpoint, we see this a lot when we get the call. It's like a medical emergency, but we have to understand what has been done. So if you're lucky enough that it's not enterprise-wide yet or not at all in terms of scope, what you want to do is isolate what you feel like is a particular aspect of the network that has been sort of affected, or the systems that have been affected if it's much of a smaller scale. Very important is to secure your backups. What we find a lot is organizations configure networks in a way where online backups are still sort of accessible to the attacker, and they go after that first. It's sort of, can we detonate that just in case there's no additional sort of backups anywhere else? So ensuring that that's taken care of is super key. And, you know, for the folks on here who actually do security operations, utilizing endpoint detection and response solutions like CrowdStrike, FireEye, HX, and so on would help you automate some of the containment activities that you perform. The last thing I'll leave with, and just to provide some more time for folks, is if you have sort of maintenance processes, scheduled tasks, that's the time to pause those or to just completely take those off of operation, because a lot of the ways that attackers propagate throughout networks is via these scheduled tasks.
Excellent. That's a great insight. So you want to constrain to control the damage, right? So you don't want to let it spread. And of course, there are a lot of aspects from there. Dana, do you have anything to add on the response side?
I think Josh did a great job of covering it. From our perspective, it's just really making sure that once you've analyzed the attack and understand how it happened, make sure that you put the mitigating controls in so it doesn't happen again. Mm-hmm. And using EDR technology, absolutely. I have conversations like that with customers all day long.
All right, cool. And I actually just checked the time. We have 5 minutes left. So we cover quite a lot of things. We talk about what kind of companies right now are the typical target for ransomware. We also talk about should we pay or not pay? Can you get the data back? And we look at from protection side, what kind of things you can do, and from respond and recovering side, what kind of things we can do. One thing I also, from my observation, is people are the weakest link actually in the cybersecurity, like it or not. So even though we put a lot of time on the, like I say, phishing, but still that's vulnerable. So my last question is for everybody, the panelists, is how can we do a better job to educate the public to defend against the ransomware? Because it's not just for large organizations, for small, medium-sized, even individual, that's the same thing. Right, so I will start with Bryan first, then Dana, then each one can share the thought there.
I mean, I don't want to repeat old talking points, but sometimes the fundamentals are the best, and user awareness is critical. Obviously, phishing, quite often it does come down to phishing. So certainly technical controls for phishing are front and center in preventing that type of a thing. The controls for that have never been better. And you can do a lot of things fairly inexpensively, running anti-phishing campaigns within your organization. So I think that's definitely a step worth taking, but not to be too pessimistic, but really smart people fall for phishing attacks every single day. So don't let that be your only line of defense, but also don't let that discourage you from doing user awareness, which sometimes gets a bit of a bad name because we keep getting compromised. Well, of course, but it shouldn't preclude you from doing those types of activities. That would be my advice. Excellent.
Actually, awareness is so important. Microsoft has a great source for the awareness training program. Actually, I shared a link already to everyone, so you can take a look at that, some simulation. And Dana, what kind of things you can add to this one to help educate people?
Number one is to please share that link with your friends and family and anybody you know. It's very valuable, especially if you have elderly parents who are not really paying attention to that. It'll save some family conversations. The second thing I look to is just passwords in general. As a user of all sorts of applications on our mobile devices, make sure you don't replicate user IDs and password combinations. If one organization you've done that with is hacked, that information will be shared on the dark web, and then approaches like credential stuffing will be used, and they'll try and gain access to other systems using the same credentials that you use. So that's super important. And kind of the third one really is look at how you interact in social media and what information is generally available to the public. If a threat actor is working to build a phishing email, they may use much of that information across Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, etc., to create something that looks like they're a trusted source.
Yeah, that's so true. All right, cool. Stas and Josh, can you quickly just share your thoughts on public education?
Sure. What Bryan said and Dana echoed, I just want to reiterate, honestly, just the fundamentals are extremely important. Making sure that your company is trained on a regular basis to identify issues, to not click. I mean, phishing emails have gotten more complex and more advanced. It's now social engineering is allowing these criminal organizations to create a profile of an individual that would increase the chances of them actually clicking on the link. So it's important for your employees to be aware of what's going on, to be cognizant of your movements, and to maybe think twice on events, on things that you would usually not think twice about. So it's just about the knowledge and awareness within your organizations.
Thank you. Josh?
Yeah, and just on this piece, we've found a lot of success encouraging organizations, both small, medium, and large, to perform business impact assessments. Essentially, the dollar figures do drive home this message a bit further and consolidates all what we've talked about on the panel, right? If you know that clicking that link would generate decent amount of fines from a confidentiality standpoint, integrity, concerns, and availability would cost the organization some downtime, right? So getting an idea from a dollar sense really helps make this picture a bit better.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. So that's all the time we have. And we have, we have four amazing panel speakers here. Dana from Microsoft, Bryan from KeyData Associates, Josh from Mandiant, and Stas from always hard to pronounce, Strigberger, Brown, Armstrong, LLP. So I would ask everybody online. So our panel list spent an hour, kind of share their insights and experience. I'd like to ask everybody give a virtual applause or clap for our panelists. Thank you very much for coming to share the insights.